Rick threw the first 140 conference that I went to, and it put a lot of things in motion for me to understand and to connect, and so it's a great honor for me to have him here and closing our conference. So thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Mila. Come here. This is a wrap. This was a wonderful conference, and it's Mila. So big hand for Mila, please. Artists, when they first start learning how to draw or paint, what they do is they practice really hard at getting the hand to do what the eyes see. And after they sort of get that down pat, the next part is they start drawing something or painting something, whether it's a landscape, a person, an idea. And they look at something and they choose what they admire. They sort of ignore what they don't admire. Sometimes what they admire is not necessarily pretty. Sometimes they admire something that's ugly. But this is the nature of art, that you pick and choose what you draw. It's not just exactly replicating what you see. It never is. That's what art's about. The painter Vincent van Gogh wrote countless letters, thousands, tens of thousands of letters to his brother Theo. And a very early letter, he writes, admire, admire, admire. That's the only true path to growth. When Vincent wrote that, he was living with destitute coal miners, the very worst Dickensian sort of environment that you could possibly live in at the time. And yet, Vincent still felt it was very important to exhort people to admire. In admiring, we have to forgive. We have to forgive things that, the things that aren't admirable. We have to sort of forgive and perhaps gloss over the things that we don't love. And forgiving, you know, something's rigid. It doesn't give. It's not forgiving. And being forgiving, we're sort of flexible. We're flexible with the stimulus that hit us that we don't love, right? And being forgiving, we're perhaps merciful. We're charitable. And being charitable, we sort of make an assumption that when people are doing something we don't like, when they're saying things we don't like, when they're behaving in ways that we detest, that it isn't personal. They're not doing it to us. That's the essence of being charitable. Now, so far, I've used the word charitable. I've used the word forgiving, merciful, loving, admiring. These are the big moral words of our society. Friedrich Nietzsche said that we have to reevaluate our morality. We can't just accept what our society, what our schools, what our parents, what our pop songs have taught us to be our true morals. We have to stop and really think about what those things are. And that's important with all of these very big words, that I think that there's real reasons that in our age of social media that we really reconsider these things and bring them home to a place that has meaning. So imagine you're walking down a street, and it could be, let's say, in Paris or Rome or here in Montreal, and you see a beautiful doorknob. Wow, that's gorgeous. And you see a beautiful window, perhaps a chimney that you like, maybe children playing on the street you admire. Sid, are you out there? Sid's gone. But if you're hearing me, Sid, remember that if you look for it, you can always find the dog crap on the street. You can always find it. You can always find what's ugly. And what really concerns me is that in this world of social media as we're going along, that people are sort of focusing on what they don't like. And they're getting snarky, and they're getting angry, and they're responding to that. And it's creating an environment of sort of mutual anger, as opposed to sort of pausing and admiring and loving what we admire. And I think we have an opportunity here. Listen, I'm not talking unicorns and sparkly stuff. I'm not talking about us sitting around singing Kumbaya. But what happens is when we focus on what we don't admire, when we focus on what we hate, and we talk to one another and we keep focusing on, hey, here, I hate that, I don't like that. You know, I got a pet peeve. Google things I really hate. Google my pet peeves. You'll find tens of thousands of them. There's no end to it. But the problem is, when I speak with you, when we speak with our children, our spouses, our employees, and we talk about what we don't like, we're reinforcing an internal story of things being broken. And people start to assume these stories. They start to believe these stories of being broken. And then we're people speaking with one another on a basis of being broken and not functional. And things don't work well that way. It just is not a wonderful thing. I was in Chicago last week for SobCon, and I went to karaoke for the first time. I've never been to karaoke. I didn't sing. I sort of had this prejudice of karaoke being this thing that drunken business people sort of do and they get wild. But it was actually pretty beautiful, the spirit. But at this particular karaoke bar, Mary Mack, the DJ, had 3 rules. And the first rule was no booing. I thought that was fabulous, no booing, because the effect that booing would have on your fellow singers would be horrible. People would get inhibited. Of course, the second rule was drink. It was a bar, after all. And her third rule was no dissing Patrick Swayze. You know, we all have things that are sacred to us. So I thought that was fair. On these trips, I take a lot of plane trips. And I get up in the plane, and I don't know about you, but every time I get in an airplane, I have a moment of amazement that I'm in a steel box flying in the air and it doesn't crash. It's just amazing to me to this day that we have this technology that does this. The second thing that amazes me as we're flying over, parts of the country is the sheer density of people down there. There are so many people. I mean, doesn't everybody else, do you guys marvel at that? I can't see you. You're marveling. You got to. There's just a tremendous amount of people. And that's in real world. Liz Strauss, whose conference I was at last week, said the thing about Twitter, the big thing about Twitter that people miss is it's the world's largest networking event. There's so many people in social media that we're bumping up against that we can't even bump up against that many people in the real world when we're those little people down in those buildings. And our opportunity as leaders in social media, and I do think that the people in this room are leaders in social media, is that you can start to make those choices as you walk down the street of social media of admiring and focusing on what you admire and not focusing on what you don't like and what you don't, what you find is broken. So in wrapping this event, I'd like to close with the words of Van Gogh and admire, admire, admire. Thank you.